Hello and welcome to this session of the Project Virtual Conference 2018. Today we have Brian Smith with us, and he is going to be presenting on Microsoft Planner and Microsoft Graph, a change management solution for Office 365. Before we get started, I just want to let the attendees know that you can use the chat option at the bottom of your screen to chat and ask any questions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our speaker, Brian Smith.
Thank you very much, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to present at the Project Virtual Conference. I'm excited to be here. I managed to catch some bits of some of the sessions earlier on today, so there's some good stuff going on, and I'll be certainly catching up with some of the recordings of the ones I missed. So my name is Brian Smith. I'm an escalation engineer for Microsoft. I work on supporting Project Online, Project Server, but also Planner as well. And this particular session is going to be talking about change management in Office 365. And this is something that came around in terms of attracting my attention because of some of the challenges of actually knowing what's going on in Office 365 and the new stuff that's going. So also before getting on to the agenda, I wanted to thank all of the sponsors of the Project Virtual Conference. Some great names, some excellent partners for Microsoft there, doing some excellent work with Project and Planner as well. So the agenda I was going to go through, I'll give a quick overview of the solution, why I saw the need for it, and some of the things that are happening which hopefully will make what I'm showing you now possibly irrelevant in the future. But for now, it's a good way of exposing some of the stuff that happened in Office 365. I'll be digging into the MS Graph Explorer. Graph is something I'll be using to pull data from various places as part of this session. There is some code going to happen. I will warn you of that. It's not real code. It's mostly PowerShell. If I can do it, it can't be too complicated. It's not quite as straightforward as stuff that Paul Mather was showing earlier on. He was showing you some of the Power App stuff. That is really sort of an easy way to sort of get into it with sort of Flow and Power Apps. What I'm showing you is a sort of next level up using Azure functions to make graph calls. But hopefully some of this stuff will get into the realm of Flow and Power Apps in the future, which is what I'll come on to later. I'll be doing a demonstration. In fact, most of the time this morning will probably be spent in a demonstration looking at the Admin Center for Office 365, looking at the Azure portal where I'll be putting the functions together, and of course looking at Microsoft Planner as well. I'll spend a little time talking about the future, the kind of things we might be able to do and make easier if we were sort of using Swagger to get this kind of thing happening in Flow and Power Apps. And then I'm sure there'll be time for questions at the end as well. So what my aim was to go from the message center, where we know from just experience that either people don't go there or can't go there, and try and expose some of this information that is really useful stuff to know in something like Planner. So it's really just pulling the information that's already in the message center into Planner and assigning it to the right people. So if I know that all of the Yammer information that's coming in Office 365 needs to go to Sarah Davis, then I can create in my plan a specific bucket for Yammer. And then on a daily basis, it will go off to the message center. And if there's anything new for Yammer, it will put it into that bucket and it will assign it to Sarah Davis. And then Sarah can sort of work through it and make sure she's on top of all the changes that are coming for Yammer. And then that gives us much better control over how we're using the different services. And I'll be walking through the code behind this and sort of how it happens. But getting back to the Message Center challenge, if any of you are Hitchhiker's Guide fans out there, you'll know that the Earth was going to be destroyed to make way for a hyperspace byway or something like that. And when the people on Earth were surprised that this was going to happen and the Earth was going to be destroyed, they were told that, well, the plans have been available on Alpha Centauri for, a number of millennia. So, if you cared, you'd have gone there and found out that this was going to happen. And to me, the message center feels a little bit like that, in that a lot of our customers, particularly on project, are working in the PMO. They're not necessarily Office 365 admins. So they don't get access to the message center at the moment, and more on that shortly. So quite often changes would be coming, and we'd say, well, yeah, this was announced on the message center, and we'd be told, well, I don't have access to the message center. And the people that do have access to the message center obviously weren't reading the information or weren't delivering that information to the PMO in the case of the project online changes. And perhaps they didn't understand the references there as well. So they didn't necessarily know that they needed to tell somebody because they didn't really understand the context of it. Now, my solution was aimed at sort of overcoming that barrier. And there's a couple of other ways of overcoming that. You can actually, in the message center, set it up to send emails of the message, of the sort of updates through to people. So that's one way of getting around it. And as I was preparing my slides, in fact, as I was going through a test run this morning, I noticed a new message came up just a couple of days ago. On the 4th of June, there was a new message in the message center. And there's going to be a new role in Office 365, a message center reader role. So potentially people in the PMO would be able to be made message center readers, and then they would be able to go to the Office 365 admin center and see the message center details. So they could then go for themselves and sort of see what was going on. So that makes getting to the message center a lot easier, and that should be rolling out soon. So that helps with getting access to that. But it's not there yet, and I still think the solution that I put together is something that may add some value for customers in terms of using Planner with Office 365. But it's good to see that the Message Center reader role is now happening. I heard about it a while ago as a plan, so it's good to see that's coming to fruition. Now, some of the technology bits behind what I'm going to be walking through, one is the Graph Explorer. And Graph is a way of getting access to, it's an API, and it's being used throughout a lot of the Office 365 stack. So Planner uses it. There's graph calls you can make to just Active Directory. So you can sort of pull things like, what's my photo that's in AD? You can also use it to get at some of the Outlook stuff, some of the group stuff. It's not yet there for Project Online, but I think in the future we should see something coming that sort of ties into Project further down the line. But one of the useful things about it is once you sort of know your way around Graph, it's fairly easy to sort of apply what you've learned through Planner to pull some stuff from groups, for example. So it's something that's sort of worth understanding and learning about. And I'll be using this later. What I'm going to be doing in the demonstration is I'm going to add a new bucket to my change management plan. There's something new that I want to know about. So I'm going to add a new bucket, and then I'm going to sort of configure my solution to go off and get information related to that particular topic and pull it into that bucket in Planner. But for that, I need to know what the ID of that bucket is. And I can get that through Graph Explorer. So it's an easy way of pulling that information together and putting it into my configuration file. The next big part of this sort of solution is using Azure Functions. Azure Functions, it's a serverless compute service that enables you to run code on demand without having to explicitly provision or manage infrastructure. So you don't have to have a VM running, you don't have to have this sort of sitting on a machine somewhere. And basically this particular example just runs on a timer. So every day at noon, it will run and it will pull my stuff into Planner. You can set it up for other triggers, and we'll see I've actually got a couple of functions. The first one runs on a timer. It writes into a queue, and then that queue triggers the next piece of code to run. So we'll see that happening as well. Some good quick start tutorials and samples out there. my particular examples are all using PowerShell, but you can write in sort of .NET languages. You can write in Python. There's a number of different things you can use functions for. I also use functions for my URL shortener. If you've sort of followed my blogs or follow me on Twitter, I'll often use this lwl.me / and then a number. And that's actually using an Azure function. So that goes off, hits Azure, passes in the 3N, and then works out, okay, if somebody wants to look at that, then I need to get the URL. It looks in an Azure table storage, gets the URL for the blog post, and then redirects to that. So there's some interesting uses for functions. One of the really good things is if you're a pretty low user of functions, which I am, my website doesn't get sort of billions of hits per day, I wish. So, you know, it isn't a big hitter in terms of the number of times I run those functions. And the same with the planner one as well. It's running daily, and then it's sort of running another set of calls to another function based on how many particular items there are in the message center. And at that sort of level of usage, Azure functions are free. You're paying something for the storage, but pretty much for the actual running of them, that's not costing anything. I mentioned there the different language options and triggering options. So I'm using a timer. You can use other things. You can use webhooks. You can use Azure table storage and trigger when some document lands in a table, for example, or also the Azure queue, which I'm using for my second function. So graph and functions play a big part in this. You can also use functions for some of the project stuff. I've done a few blog posts on how you can do that. Some of them I practically stole from Paul Mather, who'd done some other different ones on using Azure functions with Project Online. So he sort of really introduced me to the idea of using this and using it for Planner as well. So a big shout out for Paul there. He's got some great content on his blog. So without further ado, I shall switch over to a demonstration now. And I'm running a few different things here. If you see that I'm running Chrome, which I am here, I'm logged into my own trial Office 365, Bryce Smith PJO. So that's the sort of one of the Contoso sort of demonstration domains is set up on there. So I've got the Office Admin Center. I've got the Planner Hub. I'll be going into Graph Explorer as well. I've also got Project. Won't be going into that one today. And then also I've got Edge running. And in Edge, I'm logged in as Bryce Smith at Microsoft.com. So this is my sort of corporate Azure account. And this is where I'll be sort of going in and showing you the various functions and how the functions work. So first back to Google and to my Contoso domain. So if you're not familiar with the Admin Center, under here, if we sort of scroll down, we've got the Admin Center for all the different parts of Office 365. We've also got the health area where we can see service health, but also the message center. And if I go into the message center, this will show me all of the messages. And the one I highlighted just now was this one, the new feature, Message Center Reader Role. But there's plenty of other sort of messages down there that fall into sort of different categories. So what I do in my solution is I read through all of those. I actually do a text lookup on the title. There are a few other properties. When you look at the APIs for the Message Center, there are some properties that look quite promising in terms of the applies to field. But quite often the posts that are going up aren't tagged with all the things that you'd want to be tagged. So I found that wasn't really doing what I needed to do. So I needed to sort of pull it from the title. Usually it gets what you want. Sometimes you'll get a title that perhaps talks about a particular feature, but doesn't actually talk about what the particular workload is. For example, I've seen some where it might talk about something to do with inboxes, and you'd really like it to say Outlook Web Access or something like that in the title so that it pulled it into the right bucket. Project is generally pretty good. Project ones normally say project in the title, same with planner. Planner ones say planner in the title. You will sometimes get sort of, if you like, false positives where it might say project in the in the title, but it either means project or some other use of the project word. But that's the way I sort of picked it up. There's also other tags that come through, like there's different categories of stay informed and be prepared and change and all those kind of things. So some of the other properties that come through from the API, I'm also pulling out and using those as categories within Planner. If I jump across to Planner now, and I'll show you how it looks when it ends up there, and then I'll sort of step through adding a new bucket, setting up a new category to come through, and then showing you how the code would need to change to accommodate that. And in doing that, I shall walk through the code as well. It's not too complex. I won't be going ultra deep into that. Now I'm in the Planner Hub. I'm going to go into my Office 365 change management plan. And this is the one I did the screenshot from earlier. It's got a few new things in here now, just because it's been running for a couple of days and has picked up some new ones from the last couple of days. So I've got a project online, SharePoint, Yammer, Planner. Then I've also got a couple that I just sort of brought in just because they'd sort of get some big hits. So anything that says new in the title will end up in here. Anything that says updated will end up in here. Anything for Outlook will end up in here. And the way I break these down, if I open this one up, firstly, you'll see that I'm probably doing some not great code here in terms of pulling out some of the encoding of some of these characters. So my apologies for that. If anybody wants to finish my code off properly, then they're more than welcome to do it. If the particular item, and this is MC 106623, which was to do with the Project Online roll-up of task and assignment time, if any of the items have a due date associated with them, I'll pull that date in. I'll also tag them. So this one is tagged with action, plan for change, and advisory based on the properties that were set on the Message Center API itself. And then I'll also, as I'm pulling the data through, I'll pull in all the text into the description, but I'll also look through the description for any URLs as well and pull those URLs out and add them as additional information here. So there's a couple of URLs that come through with this one. If I click through, I get to our best practices for querying OData. And also the other one, I click through to the item on configuring the roll-up of time-phased reporting data in Project Online. So I pull through the contextual information that's coming from the Message Center post as well. So that's an example of how these come through and what they look like when they get here. So let's start, and we'll add a new bucket here. And I'll choose something topical. GDPR is something that I'll be talking about tomorrow morning, another session here, morning Pacific time, 7 a.m. But for now, I want to see if I've got any items in the Message Center that relate to that particular topic. So the first thing I need to do is to get my bucket ID. And for this, I'm going to use Graph Explorer. Now, Graph Explorer allows you to make graph calls against your Office 365 tenant. Now, I've logged in here, so I'm actually making graph calls against my specific tenant. It does have a few samples built in as well. So if you go to this particular URL, developer.microsoft.com, English US Graph Explorer, or if you just search on Bing or Google for Graph Explorer Microsoft, you'll get there pretty quickly. And this is the tab you want to sort of click on. You can sort of pull in all things like my photo, which is the one I pulled in at the moment, all items in my drive, so you can make calls off to OneDrive, and there's various other ones that I've made in the last couple of hours while I was sort of testing this out earlier. The other thing you can do is just sort of type in here. So if you know what you're looking for, and it's fortunate that I do, you can just sort of type in the call and then it will give the response down here. If you don't know what you're looking for, there is a great sort of documentation tab, and you can sort of look in there and find out all the different workloads and what the various calls are. All of the Planner ones are prefixed with Planner and then plans or tasks or buckets or whatever it might be, so you can sort of drill in different ways. I know this is the particular, or I know the plan ID of the particular plan I'm interested in. So this will actually be bringing back all of my plans. So we can see a lot of information here, the July morale event, a research plan, my spring HR offsite, my change management team, which isn't the one I'm going to be working on today. I've got a different change management one that I'm been playing around with. And just so I don't sort of mistype things or spend ages looking, I did save these off into notepads just to give me a quicker way of getting to it. But all I'm basically doing is pulling in the ID of this particular plan that I'm interested in. So I can paste that into there. And this brings me the plan sort of top level view, if you like. So I can see who it was created by. I can see the owner. The owner in planner terms is actually the ID of the group that this plan belongs to. So for a plan, the owner isn't a person, it's a group, an Office 365 group in this case. The user who created it was me, so CFO91 is the actual ID of me, and I perhaps will use that later on as the person who will own the Gdpr items that are going to come into my plan. You can get other things from here. So if I go into details, for instance, it will sort of show me the categories that I've got set up. So I can see that these are my 6 categories: action, plan for change, and so on. So there's plenty of sort of useful information there. But the thing I really need right now is my buckets, because I need the ID of my new GDPR bucket. And we can see here, that's the one at the top. So I've got GDPR, there's my Outlook updated and all the other ones down there. But the one I really want now is this one. So I can just copy that. And I'll just drop that into Notepad so I can pick it up later. And I'll show you where I am using that in a short while. So park that down. That's all I need from Planner for the moment. So I'm going to head off to my Azure portal, and the function I'm interested in, I've got put onto my desktop here. It's the Brian Smith 0365 MC for Message Center. And as this loads, we'll see that I've got a couple of different functions. I've got my read message on timer, and then I've got write task to plan. And if I click on read message on timer, we can see the code here. And I'll step through this in a second, but I'll also just show you some of the files that are associated with this as well. I have the Microsoft Identity Model Clients Active Directory DLL, and I do have a blog post that covers this as well. So I won't expect you to sort of remember all this as I go through it. It is sort of documented out there. I think from memory that this needs a specific version. I was working with somebody recently who was trying some of this planner code out and found that if they used the latest version, they had to make some changes to the way it was called. So this uses a specific version at this time. So I might do a blog update to sort of talk about that. This is my function, well, this is my run.ps1. If I look at the function JSON, this includes information like where the data is going. So it's going to go out to Azure Web Job Storage as an out queue. So it's my binding. So it's starting on a timer, it's going out to a queue. Run.ps1 is my PowerShell script. Products.json is just a JSON file that includes my buckets, basically. So this is if you like, the nerve center of the how the application actually works. So for example, if I copy that and add a new section here, this can be my GDPR section. And the text here doesn't need to match the bucket. This is the text I'm going to be searching for, but I could put Project Online as my bucket name, but I could just be searching for a project in here. So I put GDPR. I then need to put in the bucket ID of where this needs to go in my plan. And I can paste this in here. And then the person it's assigned to, I'll leave that at CF09. That's me, as I mentioned earlier. So I already own some of the other stuff, so I can own that one as well. In fact, I think I managed to break Outlook by doing that. I think I didn't work. I think I must have cut rather than copied. So that shouldn't matter too much. We'll probably see that Outlook won't get updated anymore, and I'll fix that later. But for the moment, we should see that GDPR does work and gets all that data in. So I can save that. So now I've got the new file that's sitting there, and I'll just step over to the PowerShell stuff and briefly walk through this. I won't go into deeply what's happening, but I'll sort of just basically talk about the various different sections of the code. So first off, I'm getting my credentials. I'm actually using, if I go back to here, under application settings is where you can set up some of the variables you're using. And I won't dip into there just at the moment because the variables I'm using are my actual passwords for logging into here. And not that I don't trust anybody who's watching this, but you know, I just don't want my session to be curtailed by the fact that my password has changed or my plan's been deleted or anything untoward like that. So I get the credentials, I get the password from my environment. I get my module, which I've loaded into the same files area. So the default sort of locations when you're putting things into a function like this are sort of the D drive, home site, www root, and then the name of the function itself. So I'm getting that module in. I'm setting it up to use for as an ADAL call. I'm setting my resource API URL, which in this case, because I'm hitting the message center, is managed.office.com. I'm setting up the authority, which is my Active Directory, or my AAD tenant, which is my brysmithpgo.onmicrosoft.com. Then setting up a few other things on the auth context, and then getting a token based on that, all of that information that I put in. So that token then allows me to make the calls that I'm going to be making. The next thing I do is get my products from my products.json, and I convert that from JSON so I can use it as an object within PowerShell. And then I read through the service message posts and get ones of the type message center. So the service message posts or the API call can also get service health information. So you could surface different information in different places. So you could have the same application, the same function that's pulling through message center posts and perhaps putting them into Planner, but could also be pulling through service health posts and maybe even posting those up onto a SharePoint site, for instance. So you're getting the service health information in front of your users on one of your SharePoint pages, for example. So there's plenty of different ways that you could sort of consume these various things. The next bit is basically putting together the web request that I'm going to be making and going off and getting my messages. And then it's getting the message contents out, pulling the values out. And then for each of the message, it's checking to see whether there's a product that I'm interested in. And it could be that, and it does loop through every message for every product. So it could be that one message says something like, we're now adding Yammer into Teams. And if I had a Teams bucket and a Yammer bucket, then that message would go into both because I could have different people that were looking after those different workloads. So, you know, there is some duplication, but it is by design rather than sort of accident. For each of my messages then, I start pulling out things like or setting the action types and the classifications based on the information that's coming through. So this is where I'm sort of tying up the categories in Planner to all of the properties that come through from the message center. I'm pulling the due date through there as well, and also pulling through sort of an updated date on there as well. I'm pulling through the description, reference and product and adding these to my sort of output as well, and my bucket ID. So some of this information is coming from the message, some is coming from my JSON file via this product object product. And then what I'm doing once I've got all this information is throwing it out to an Azure queue. So this is like the first part of my process. It's just going through and pulling all the queues out, putting it into a particular format, and throwing it out to a queue. And a queue is just a storage place in Azure. And I'll be showing you that through the Azure Storage Explorer shortly as well. And we should see those messages come through. The other things we can see here is we can monitor. So we can see when this ran, whether it was successful, how long it took to run. And we should see in here that I ran it a couple of hours ago once this page loads up. That's being a bit slow. I won't hang about for that. I'll get onto the other part of the code now, and then we can come back and show you the monitoring side later. So my first function will read the messages, and for each message that I need a particular product for, or I have a particular product for, it will write that information out into the queue. And then this second piece of code will pick up those queue jobs as they come in. So there'll be one for every message center post that I'm going to put into Planner. So for some message center posts, there could be 2 Planner posts coming from one message center posts. So it's getting its trigger input. It's getting the message center task is what's coming in, and then it's doing all some of the setup stuff that we saw before. So all the credentials and the authentication and the tokens. So I'll skip over that fairly quickly. It's then getting my tasks. So for each of the tasks, I'm sort of breaking it out and creating those items in Planner. So I'm making a call off to Planner to see whether they already exist. So I'm getting my tasks from Planner to see whether I've already got the task there or not. I can then check if the task already exists based on the bucket ID, and then I can choose to sort of add the task. So I don't do too much in terms of what's already there, what's not there. I sort of tend to just sort of read everything each time and go through everything. And this is where I'm creating my object that I'm going to be passing into Planner as part of my creation of a new task. So I'm getting the due date, some of the other tasks, some of the other Planner stuff like order hint shows what order it should be coming into. And this is sort of a default that just sort of puts it at the end. I'm then adding my title from my message center task as my title of my plan. I've got the Planner ID, which is a sort of a constant in this particular case. You could potentially write out to different plans. I'm writing all mine to the same plan, but you might have one plan for the people that look after Exchange and Outlook and a different plan for the people that look after sort of Project and Planner, for example. I'm then setting my categories. So depending what categories are set for the message center, I'm setting the categories on for Planner. So in some cases, there may be sort of 2 or 3 that are set to true based on the categories that come through from Message Center. I then get my bucket and assignee so that I know where I need to add this particular task and who I need to assign to it. And this is where I make my new task call. So I'm getting some other information here to create the task. And then I'm adding my task details. And the task details are things like the additional information. So the URLs that I'm sticking at the end. So I'm actually walking through my description. And for all the places in my description that this regular expression, which will actually track down a URL, if I find any that match that, then I will add those to my matches. And then I can sort of add those in as an array. of links. So these are my external links that I'm then adding into my task details. And you'll see if you go up to the documentation that I've tended to use the terminology that's used within the planner documentation. So you should be able to follow this through if you sort of look at the documentation as well. So that's pretty much all I do there, is sort of adding in the references. I did find I needed to do some replacements. There were some sort of character strings that didn't go through too well. As you could see from my screenshot and when I went into that particular task, I'm not doing a great job of cleaning up some of the apostrophes and that kind of thing that appear in there. So there's still a little bit of work to be done on this. Then setting various other things like what the preview type is going to be. So that's going to show my references. I then needed to do a short sleep because I was finding that that I hadn't got all the information. If I was going off to Planner to get the new task ID to set the details, that wasn't there at that point. So I just had a short wait at that point. I then make my web request and I'm going off to Planner/tasks and giving it a new task ID and the details. So this is where I'm adding in my details. I'm getting the E tag for that, and then I can make the call to actually do the patch to change those details. And that's about it. That's I did do a little bit of write output here. You do get some debugging capabilities within the function. So when you're first playing around with it and trying to get it working, you can actually run them from within here rather than just running them based on the triggers that you've set up. And then you can sort of monitor what's going on. So what I'll do now, I'll just jump back to the monitor and see whether that wants to load up quickly for me. Yep, it's running now. So can see that I ran it where it ran automatically at noon. So and that one took about 21 seconds. The idea of functions is that I think they may have increased the limit. I think when they first came out, it was like you shouldn't be running for anything more than 5 minutes. I think it would sort of time out at that point. That may have been increased to 10 minutes, but they tend to be things where you want to write them to be in and out pretty quickly. So my first function takes about, you can see here, anything from about 14 seconds up to nearly 40 seconds. And I don't really care how long it takes. I mean, it probably depends, what's happening on that particular environment where the function's been run up. And it's serverless. Obviously there is a server, but it's just a server that I don't care about and don't need to know about. If I look at the monitor for the second function, we should see that this gets run quite a lot more. And we can see that each one takes somewhere about 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. So these are sort of pretty quickly in and out. I can also see that I had some errors in the last 30 days. I haven't had a chance to dig into these. I suspect that I may be sort of missing something that, some text that could come through that's sort of breaking my code somewhere, and just haven't been back to work out what's breaking that and what I'm missing. You do also get information in application insights as well. So I do get an email every week that sort of tells me how long these are taking to run on average and whether they're slower than they were last week and all that kind of stuff. So there's some great background information that comes through there. So if I go back to my read messages on timer, I'm not going to run it on the timer this time. I'm going to run it by clicking on run. But first off, I'm going to load up the Microsoft Azure Storage Explorer. And the Storage Explorer does exactly what it says on the box. It allows you to explore your storage. So these are various storage accounts that I've got in Azure, and I can get in and I can see what data is going through. So in this particular case, I'm interested in a queue, which I created to hold these messages as they go through. So my first function will throw messages into this queue, and then the fact that they hit that queue triggers the second function, which will take them out row by row and process them. That's the theory anyway. Let's see if in practice this is all going to work for me and the demo gods are smiling. So I'm on the read messages on timer. I'm just going to run that. It says I'm starting up here. It's getting going. I'll refresh this. Gosh, that happened quickly. I'm glad I didn't miss it. I was trying this earlier on, and it seemed to take quite a few seconds before this even got there. Must have warmed it up to the fact that it only ran a short while ago. So we can see here I've got 32 of 44 messages in the queue. And basically what I'm writing out is the message information. So I can sort of see some of these are going into my updated column, some are going into SharePoint, some are going into Yammer, some are going into new. I can see who they're assigned to, and all the rest of the information sort of goes on there. And these items will live in the queue. I think the default is something like a week. So if they don't get taken off in a week, they just die away anyway. If I refresh again, we'll see that they're all gone. In fact, it's showing me 0 of 13. So it might mean that there's still, yeah, those final 13 are now gone as well. So all the messages have gone from the queue. And I can see that this function completed. And this time it took 6 seconds. So, considering it's been taking 20 or 30 seconds in the past, this was a particularly quick run, probably because I'd been sort of running it earlier on and it was still fresh and still sitting waiting to be started. Now, the proof of the pudding here, as they say, is whether anything happened over on my plan. And if we go back here, and it's already refreshed because Planner does a diff sync and pulls in information on a periodic basis based on any sort of changes that happen, I can see that it's pulled in an item from the message center that contained GDPR in the title. And I can see here that it's brought in all this information. In this case, it didn't have any attachments or any other information, just textual. But here I can see that it's assigned to me. And I can say, yep, I'm on it. It's in progress. I could set a due date if I want. I guess the due date for GDPR is probably something that is in the past anyway, in terms of the 25th of May. But that's basically how it all works. So just one more thing I just wanted to jump into the Azure portal before I jump back to my slides again. And that was just looking at more broadly at functions. I can see here that I've got both of these ones enabled. I can click on plus to add a new function, and this shows some of the other functions you can create and how they are triggered. So we can have ones that are triggered by our HTTP on timers, a queue trigger, which my second function was. We can trigger them from service bus. We can also use blob triggers, Cosmos DB, plenty of things here. And it also shows the languages available for each of these as well. So you can have C#, F#, JavaScript. You can also have PowerShell as well. And I think you can use Python in these as well, but I think there's a different section for experimental language support. We'll show you ones that are sort of in preview. So if I enable experimental language support, that then shows the PowerShells and the Pythons and the TypeScripts as well. The other thing I will show you, I'll just jump on over to one of my other functions. And this is one that's currently disabled. And if I go into my application settings, this is where I was saying about the passwords, and this is not my password. My password isn't my password, if you see what I mean. I just put some stuff in here just because I wanted to show you this and didn't want to give my password away or my client ID. I didn't mention the client ID earlier on. This is something you set up in the Azure Active Directory. And this is where you set permissions for your app to do what it needs to do. And I cover this in the blog post as well. But you basically set up an app ID, and you say that that app is allowed to read groups and edit groups and do all the stuff that you need it to do. There's a couple of different parameters you need to set up on that. And then you have to give that the permission as well to say, yep, I okay this, because there's no sort of website to go to. It's the kind of thing, if you go to a website that is hosting some Office 365 sort of graph type capability, you'll often see a thing where it says, a little bit like mobile apps as well, this app needs to read your profile or whatever it might be. So setting the app ID is really doing that, but you have to do it because there's no sort of interface to the way the functions are running. You set up the app ID and then you give it the permissions and grant it the permissions at that point. And then when it runs, it knows who's making the call and where they're coming from, and the fact that they've got permission to do the stuff that they need to do as well. So you can also see in here, I've got my AAD password, my tenant, which are a couple of the other parameters that we're going through. And I've also got the Message Center plan ID. So this isn't the plan ID I was using just now. This is another plan that's in my my planner item. So I just wanted to show you that, just to give you a sort of full view of the information there. So back over to my slides. Let's be a second getting these up and running.
And just so you know, Brian, we don't have any questions at this point.
Okay. So I'll summarize and then see if some questions come up. So in summary, I've got an Azure function that's triggered on a timer that reads from the Office 365 Service API. Based on the message type and the text in the title, it selects if they need to go to Planner and adds messages to an Azure queue with all the various right properties set up within that message in a JSON format. In the queue, that triggers another function, and for each message, it writes out the Message Center posts to the relevant plan and the bucket, and assigns it to the right person, and pulls out the URLs, etc., and also sets categories. So all of that's really controlled just by that products.json file. And we saw I added a new bucket ID and a new assigned person and a new string to look for. It found there was one Message Center post with GDPR and put that into my GDPR bucket. In my case, I made PowerShell calls to Graph, and the blog post there goes into a little bit more detail and sort of steps through the code as well. So if there's anything that I went over a little bit quick and you didn't quite catch, then you can head off to that blog post and get the information there. Now, going forward, where does this go in the future? It'd be great if there was a flow to do this. And if you go out to user voice, there's quite a few people saying, I wish there was a flow that allowed me to get at the Message Center posts. So if you feel the same, get out there as well and add your voice to it. I haven't followed up with the Message Center team recently, but they were certainly aware of the need. I've thought that I should spend some time building a Swagger file for the Message Center API, because then you can actually use that to create your own custom flow. And then once you've got that Swagger file, then a lot of what I've done today, you could just sort of build in the Flow or Power Apps environment, which probably is a lot more accessible for most people than pulling in to the Azure portal and writing functions. But I need to get my head around Swagger, and I haven't had a chance to sort of do that since first putting this together. I've also put a link there to the Message Center API. It's part of the Office 365 Service Communications API. And as I mentioned, that does allow you to pull other things out, such as the Service Health Dashboard information. So, you know, part of this session was really showing you about change management for Office 365. But the other thing I wanted to get across was really how you can easily use this kind of functionality to link different bits together. So I'm using Planner. You could throw this information into Project Online, for instance, by making a REST call and pushing these in as tasks in Project. I just chose Planner because it seemed to suit the need in this particular case. But there's plenty of other ways you might want to use functions to use with Planner and project data. The other cool thing, as I showed in one of the earlier slides, was there's now a reader role for the Message Center. So there'll be fewer excuses for customers not to have seen the messages that we post up. Because believe me, I'd rather a customer didn't hit a problem than I have to say, yeah, you've hit that problem that we told you about 3 weeks ago. Because I don't like saying that kind of thing. But, I do realize it is hard to get to the message center. So having solutions like this, having the reader role will really enable us to get those messages out to the people that really need to read them. So that's all I had for today. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a break before the next Project Virtual Conference session. My contact details are there, brian.smith@microsoft.com. I'm on Twitter @lunchwithalens. I don't take pictures of food. I get out at lunchtime and take pictures of other things. My blog sites are there. I tend to do a lot of the planner stuff and the programmability stuff on blogs.msdn.microsoft.com/brysmith. But a lot of the stuff we do for project, including the sort of lists of the fixes that come out on a monthly basis, they're posted up on blogs.technet.microsoft.com/project support. So linking both of those ones there.
Okay,
thank
Brian.
you very much.
So at this point, we don't have any questions. We've got some obviously positive feedback for you. As always, your sessions are full of information that everyone loves, and thank you for referencing your blog site. So we're going to end this session. Again, thank you attendees, and thank you, Brian, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Okay, thank you very much.